In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theda Skopol found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office,
this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's a brand new week. Happy Monday, top of the morning to you, or the afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We got a lot to talk about today. No guests, just you and me, but a whole lot going on. You know, sometimes summer is just so slow, and it's just like, oh, how do we find, you know, we start going into esoteric topics and talking about UFOs and psychology. Not now. So, what are you going to do when the Republican Party comes for your wife, your daughter, or your sister? We'll talk about that in a moment. Also, Robert Reich has a very interesting proposal about kicking Joe Manchin out of the Democratic Party, and it actually makes a certain amount of sense. I'll share that with you in about 10 minutes. In our second hour, could Trump end up president if he's not indicted soon? He's making that bet. You think it's possible? We'll get into that at the top of the second hour. And also the billionaires buying the midterm elections. Judd Legum over at popular.info has an absolutely shocking expose of what's going on right now. Basically, since Citizens United, and particularly in the last few years, our elections have been bought and sold by billionaires, by American billionaires. I'll tell you the details, the gory details of that in the second hour of the program. In our third hour of the program, the Secretary General of the United Nations, António Guterres, has a new warning for humanity, saying that we face collective suicide over the climate crisis if we don't do something now. I'll share the details of that with you. It's pretty amazing in our third hour. And also, the Republican Party wants to abolish the Department of Education in the name of freedom. And you'll never guess who's leading the charge this last weekend in Florida. We'll talk about that in the third hour of the program. But to start out, what are you going to do when the GOP comes for your wife, daughter, or sister? And I mean this is a serious question. Last week, a Texas woman with an ectopic pregnancy, which never produces a baby and always kills women if it's not treated, was forced to wait until that ectopic pregnancy ruptured in her fallopian tube, potentially ending her life within a matter of hours or days at the most. Imagine that was someone you loved, or you if you're female. Republican laws are now making doctors wait until women are nearly dead before they can provide life-saving medical treatment for lethal conditions like ectopic pregnancies or incomplete miscarriages. This is insane. Fred Narapol was tweeting, well, actually there's a story about it in the Washington Post. The headline, in Wisconsin, a woman bled for more than 10 days from an incomplete miscarriage when emergency room staff refused to remove the fetal tissue because they were afraid of being prosecuted under new anti-abortion laws. So, serious question. What would you do if your daughter, wife, mother, or sister, who was forced to bleed out for 10 long days, just so that some Republican politician could crow about, I am so pro-life? What would you do? They would have to physically restrain me. And to compound this, as you are listening to my voice this very moment, Republicans in state after state are feverishly pushing to the next step to strip women of even more reproductive rights, including access to IUDs and birth control pills. Republican pharmacists and drugstore clerks are refusing to sell condoms to married couples, for God's sake. Meanwhile, over at Fox so-called News, it appears that they're trying to get the abortion doctor in Indiana who gave the abortion to that 10-year-old girl, this Obgyn. They're trying to get her murdered just like they did Dr. George Tiller back in the day. Remember Bill O'Reilly over 30 times saying, Tiller the baby killer, until finally a guy shot him as he was being the usher in his church. He thought he was safe in church. Not so much. In the weeks since 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court ruled in their Dobbs decision that Republican-controlled legislatures could illegally insert police between doctors and women, multiple rape victims, including a 10-year-old, have been denied abortions or had to flee their Republican-controlled states. And this Republican insistence on male supremacy and the resubjugation of women, this goes way beyond birth control or abortion. There's a long history here. Back in 1869, the Republican Party was putting forward the 14th Amendment, which was generally considered to be a good thing. But Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who were the highest profile, earliest, the women's suffrage movement literally goes back to the founding of our republic, Abigail Adams and friends, but these two were really, they kicked off the modern day movement that led to the 20th Amendment in 1919. But because the 14th Amendment has a sentence that says voting rights shall not be denied to any of the male inhabitants of the states, Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote in 1866, quote, if the word male be inserted in the Constitution, it will take a century to get it out again. This was the first time gender was in the Constitution. Keep in mind, the first 15, 20 years after the founding of the Republic in multiple northern states, women were voting. There is no constitutional prohibition against it. It was state after state that outlawed women voting, starting aggressively around 1810. So anyhow, Stanton said if you put the word male in the Constitution, it'll be 100 years to get it out. And sure enough, it wasn't until 1963 with the Equal Pay Act and 1964 with the Civil Rights Act that women got equal pay and prohibitions against workplace discrimination. When the Biden, now that act was passed through reconciliation, so it has to be renewed every 10 years. They had to pass it that way because of Republican objections in 1963. So, you know, it's been renewed every year ever since, and it came up for reauthorization in 2022. Or, excuse me, in 2021. And this was the Paycheck Fairness Act of 2021, which would have updated and reauthorized the Equal Pay Act of 1963. It passed the House on a 217 to 210 vote, but all 210 of the no votes, with one exception, Henry Cuellar, I think it was, were blocked by Republicans in the House of Representatives. Now, it passed the House, it went to the Senate, and there it died because of a united Republican filibuster. All those protections for women that were passed in 1963 and reauthorized in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2010s, all of those protections died in the United States Senate because of a Republican filibuster. The only reason that any of those protections are even law right now is that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, who runs the Budget Committee, were able to slip them into the must-pass Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of last fall. That's the only reason, or actually it was this March that it passed. That's the only reason any of them are at law, and that eliminated a whole bunch of protections for women. So anyhow, as I've told you before, you know, in the first 100 years of America, this is what Republicans want to take us back to. In the first 100 years of America, a married woman was not legally allowed to make out a will because she couldn't own land or legally control anything worth willing to another person. Any property she brought into the marriage became her husband's at the moment of marriage and would only revert to her if he died and she did not remarry, but even then she only got 1/3 of it. A male executor would be appointed, he got 1/3, and then he decided where the remaining 1/3 went. When she died, the executor just kept the property for herself. Women could only sue in court under the provisions provided for children and the mentally ill, or the mentally insane as they were referred to back then. If a woman was poor, it was a virtual certainty that if her husband died, her children would be taken away from her. This is the world that Republicans want to take us back to. I mean, right now in U.S. Congress, women make up 15%, just 15% of the Republican House seats, and 8% of Republican Senate seats. By contrast, women make up 40% of Democratic House seats. In 1974, it was a law in most states that a father, husband, brother, or male friend had to sign for a woman to get a credit card, a car loan, or sign a mortgage. I remember having to sign for Louise's first credit card in 1972, the year we were married. And when banks did give women loans, they had them sign what was called a baby letter, which said that if they got pregnant, they had to pay back the loan immediately with penalties. Now, that practice got ended in 1983 when Bella Abzug, the New York Democrat, introduced the Equal Credit Act, sponsored by 12 Democrats in the House. It passed in 1974. But then in 1976, the Supreme Court, in a ruling called General Electric v. Gilbert, said that corporations discriminating against women was perfectly legal. William Rehnquist wrote in his majority opinion, pregnancy is a voluntarily undertaken and desired condition. In other words, it's not a normal medical condition. I mean, this is just crazy. It goes on. I've got a much longer history about this over at HartmannReport.com. If you want all the details and the hot links, the 1994 Violence Against Women Act, for example, 172 Republicans in the House of Representatives voted no. It got killed this year. Marjorie Taylor Greene voted against it. She said, if you want to protect women, make sure they are gun owners and know how to defend themselves. That's the greatest defense for women. Women don't need protections in the workplace under law. And now Republicans are renewing this campaign of terror. Jesse Waters, in my opinion, is trying to get this Indiana physician murdered. He's showing her picture on television and calling her out. And women are being taken literally right to the edge of death before they can be provided with any kind of care that might even resemble an abortion, like finishing off a miscarriage or dealing with an ectopic pregnancy. So again, I ask, how will you respond when this happens to someone in your life? This is no longer an academic question.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Should Democrats kick Joe Manchin out of the Democratic Party? I'm beginning to think Robert Reich is right. Let me tell you about that right after the break. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
That's because I love you, Tom, and KPFK. The question
Gotcha, Morris.
The question on the floor is, what would you do if the police came and said your kid was illegal, your wife, something happened with your wife or your kid, they got a pregnancy and you can't address it? I would act like one of them Latinos did down in Uvalde. F the police, man, I'm going to protect my kids. Same thing, I'm going to protect my wife or my children. Or my daughter.
Yeah, the problem is you and I don't know how to perform the surgery necessary to save a woman's life from an ectopic pregnancy.
No, but Tom, here's the thing: they would have to gun me down. You see, and I'm a softie. I'm a softie. I don't even own a gun, but I'm gonna tell you, I do know Morris. They would have to gun me down. But I just wanted to answer the question on the floor. You were talking about public education, Tom, how they're trying to decimate public education. They've been trying to do that going back to Rand Paul in 1988. They've been trying to get rid of public education. As a matter of fact, the vehicle, the bus that they're using is called FCMAT, F-C-M-A-T. What it stands for is Financial Crisis Management Association Team. And what they keep doing is moving the goalposts. Like when you were a young man, you done got old. They used to say, well, you know what, the schools are overcrowded. There's too many kids in the school. Now today they're saying, you ain't got enough kids to support the overhead, right? Now check this out. When they come in with a darn charter school, they'll hold them to different principles. Them teachers over there don't even have to have a degree. They got 17 kids in that school. They're not saying a darn thing. But in a public school, if they got 98 kids, they're saying that they got to close them schools. This is an attack on democracy. When you attack public education, you attack democracy. Now, these knuckleheads, these libertarian economic knuckleheads, they're trying to apply private business principles to a public service. Your initial premise is screwed up. You can't do that. And, of course, we can racialize this if we want to be right, because FCMAT is closing schools in black and brown communities. They're not closing schools in white suburban communities. But either way, the principles that they're using should not be applied here. We need to reinvest in public education. And so I just wanted to respond to that. It's called FCMAT, Tom. And again, I would be like them parents down in Texas, Uvalde, Texas. Y'all would just have to shoot Morris.
Yeah.
And I'm a coward, too.
Yeah, that woman who ran in and collected her child. Yeah, I get it. Morris, thank you. Thanks for the call. Wow. Carl in Rockford, Illinois. Hey, Carl, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi. I want to correct you a little bit. Bill O'Reilly didn't get Dr. Tiller killed. He didn't help any.
He called him Dr. Tiller, the baby killer, 32 times on television.
Yeah, but the guy who put it over the edge was Glenn Beck when he was still on Fox News.
Ah. How so?
Yeah, because one night on his show, he says, I wish I could kill Dr. Tiller. And
really?
Shortly after that, somebody got Dr. Tiller killed. But that's not the end of the story. After he got away with that, and nobody arrested him for accessory to murder, he said, I would like to kill Michael Moore. And Michael Moore had to hire extra security because there was people that actually wanted to kill him.
Well, and he went after the Tides Foundation. I don't know that he actually said, I want to kill. I'll have to fact check that, Carl. But I know that he went after the Tides Foundation, and this group of armed thugs went to the Tides Foundation. State police stopped them, and they literally had a shootout on the highway. They were on their way to assassinate these people. Carl, thank you for the call. Yeah, I had forgotten about Glenn Beck. Change starts with you.
You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
So are you and your family and your kids safer with a gun in the house? Well, Pew Research Center and Children's Hospital put together some amazing statistics. These are all quotes from their study. Quote, guns kept in homes are more likely to be involved in a fatal or non-fatal accidental shooting, criminal assault, or suicide attempt than to be used to injure or kill in self-defense. Your kids aren't safer either. Quote, between 2015 and 2020, there were at least 2,070 unintentional shootings by children that resulted in 765 deaths and 1,366 non-fatal gun injuries. In 2020 alone, at least 125 toddlers and children under age 5 shot themselves or someone else. And the pandemic didn't help. Unintended shootings in 2020 from March to December went up more than 30% compared to the previous year. And a shocking number of gun owners leave their firearms lying around unsecured. 1 in 3 guns are unlocked in the homes. I've got a video with all the details over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour." So Robert Reich has a very provocative piece in his Substack newsletter today, robertreich.substack.com. It's titled, "Is it time for Democrats to kick Joe Manchin out of the party?" And on its surface, and you and I have had this conversation before on this program, many times now over the past couple of years. Joe Manchin keeps sabotaging Democrats, as does Kyrsten Sinema. And here's the problem. Democrats are going into this election, into this fall election, saying, yeah, we control the House, the Senate, and the White House, and yeah, we haven't gotten squat done. Now, I mean, we all know that they actually have done a lot of good things, but in terms of their, really big agendas, resolving student debt and dealing with the climate and all these kinds of things, not so much. And taxing billionaires and putting America, and extracting some tax money from corporations, no. And as a result of that, a lot of people are going, hey, we gave you the House, the Senate, and the White House, and you didn't do a damn thing. I'm not going to show up and vote. I'm not so worried that, people who might vote Democratic are going to vote Republican. But if they don't show up, the effect is the same. They're demoralized. So if Chuck Schumer were to grow a spine and remove Joe Manchin from being the chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, Joe Manchin, the guy who makes more from his coal business than he does from his Senate salary, Joe Manchin, the guy who's received more money from the oil, coal, and gas industry than any other senator in the United States in the history of the United States. If he was to say to Joe Manchin, sorry, Joe, you're out. You no longer have this committee, and Joe Manchin said, okay, screw you, I'm going to become a Republican, what happens? What happens is that we go into the midterms going, hey, we don't have control of the Senate. We never really had it because of Manchin, and now we definitely don't have it. So please vote for Democrats and give us control of the Senate. That's a hell of a lot more compelling argument politically, as Robert Reich points out, former labor secretary in the Clinton administration, points out in his newsletter over at Substack today. I'm agreeing with him for the first time. I had not considered that this way, and I think politically it makes perfect sense. It's a much stronger argument to say we don't control the Senate. That's why we didn't get things done. Vote for more Democrats, give us control of the Senate, and we will do those things. Now that Manchin and Sinema have become Republicans. Strip Sinema of her committee seats as well. Strip them both, just like they did Marjorie Taylor Greene in the House of Representatives. And let's see what happens. I'm willing to have it out. Are you? What do you think? Picking up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Up your calls on the other side of the break. It's like the old Chris Christopherson song, right? Freedom's when you got nothing left to lose. That's not I'm mangling the song. You know what I'm talking about. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. There are so many issues to contend with. However, first let me just ask, Tom, with our Democratic elected officials, if they're asked the question, because I viewed the political shows Sunday, just on regular network, and if they're asked, should Trump be charged or go to jail if he's convicted of a crime, why is there such hesitancy for Democratic elected officials to say yes?
Fear.
Or, Tom, to make the statement, any elected official or anyone committing a crime should be investigated, charged, indicted, and if found, convicted. I mean, what is wrong with saying that?
I think it's good old-fashioned fear, Pam. Trump is acting like a mob boss, and he's got everybody cowed. They're all afraid that he's gonna raise his right-wing armed army to go out and assassinate Democratic members of Congress. I think they're frankly terrified, and with good cause. But that doesn't mean that you let terrorists get away with what they're doing.
And that's my concern, Tom. We need the Democratic Party because many of us out here are just facing some of the same fears that they might be. But we're told day in, day out, still organize, go vote, still stand up to the criminals, the wrongdoers, and call them out. Yeah. We expect elected officials to do the same. Your Republican colleagues, and particularly with Joe Biden, they're not the same Republican Party of last year.
No.
Of years before. And I think Joe Biden has to wake up. And yes, let's boot Joe Manchin out. And regarding cinema, I want to see the LGBT community hold her more accountable, Tom, and put more pressure on her.
Yeah.
And lastly, may I just add this? My Congressman Davis asked about a survey on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And I just had a response. I said 2 members, one of which, Thomas, is a sexual predator. I believe Anita Hill. The other, Kavanaugh, is a man who attempted rape. I believe Dr. Blasey Ford. I said, this is disgusting. I said, VP Harris said 3 conservative judges lied under oath when asked about Roe v. Wade at their confirmation hearing time. And she said she believed they lied, and so she voted no.
Yep.
So for me, the overturning of Wade, it is despicable, and it is a gift to the racists, and we need the Democratic Party to stand up. And the message on this is simple. Just simply say America trusts women to make decisions about their own bodies.
Amen.
I mean, Tom, it's not...
Yeah, no, it's real simple.
It's pro-life.
It's like, if you're opposed to abortion, don't get one. If you're opposed to gay marriage, when somebody of the same sex proposes to you, say no, thank you. I mean, this whatever happened to personal responsibility? That used to be the thing that, we're all about, the Republicans, we're all about personal responsibility. No, that was code for we don't want to pay our taxes. Pam, thank you. Cool. Brilliant. Spot on. Thank you, Pam. Marie in Franklin, West Virginia. Hey, Marie, your thoughts for the day.
Well, greetings, Tom of the Hartmann clan.
Hi.
Hey, we need to get rid of Joe Manchin entirely.
Well, he's your senator. Do you think that they should? Well, yeah. Well, you live in West Virginia. I mean, do you think that that Schumer should strip him of his committee assignments and say, "Sorry, Joe, if you're going to sabotage us, your career is done"?
Yes, indeed. He is a Republican in Democrat clothes.
Yeah. Amen.
He's as evil as they come. There's one of the coal plants is just a county north of me. Mm-hmm. They buy all his dirty coal, and everything around that whole mountain is dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's only...
People get sick there, and it don't matter. Joe Manchin, he'll get another federal grant.
Right. And more millions from his donors. And I mean, there's only 11,000 people working in the entire coal industry in the entire state of West Virginia. It's not like West Virginia is a coal state anymore. West Virginia's principal source of income is federal welfare that comes from other states. And you know, and then obviously there's a whole bunch of other industries. But you know, Joe Manchin is I think it's time for him to go. I'm with you. Marie, thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspective as a West Virginian. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind this morning?
Tom, thank you so much for taking my call. I do agree with you, and I have a new name for Joe Manchin. His name is Dino Manchin, Democrat in name only. Yeah. And he should be definitely kicked out. And perfect example, you know, I just came from Europe, and the climate change down there, it's bad. It was very hot. It's a different type of heat. I go to Europe every year, but this year it was completely different, a different type of heat. And we keep talking about climate change as like something in the future. It's happening right now. You know,
I agree. And in Europe, they know this, by the way. They acknowledge this. You will not find a single Republican who will acknowledge that climate change is real in the United States.
And he has to be voted out, you know, and just start from scratch. But what I wanted to ask you, Tom, is that, I mean, this trip to Saudi Arabia with Biden, I mean, what are the feedback? Is it considered to be a success? I mean,
I think there's important stuff here. I mean, not that goes way beyond the price of oil. There's also peace in the Middle East. There's also dealing with Iran. There's also, you know, trying to work out something with Israel. You know, we created an alliance in 1941, I think it was. Might have been before that. We created an alliance with Joseph Stalin after he had murdered 30 million of his own people. Right? Wars make strange bedfellows. If we have to have an alliance with Mohammed Bonesaw in order to make the world work right now, you know, yeah, he's a terrible guy and it's a terrible thing. But, you know, sometimes you have to do that. That's my opinion of it, Omar. I'm far less hysterical about the fact that Biden fist bumped the Crown Prince. At least he called him out. You know, God bless him for that. No other president before him even did that.
And I agree with you. And Tom, the last thing I want to talk to you about, you know, Build Back Better was pretty much created by Bernie Sanders, and it's been copied by Glenn Youngkin here in Virginia, like a mini Build Back Better. Starting September, every family is going to get $500, and every individual is going to get $250. Wow. And and I think he's planning to run for 2024. Keep an eye on him. He's preparing for.
I know he is. I know he is. Yes. I've heard this and thank you, Omar. Yeah, Republicans know how to play the populist card. Linda in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hey, the more I listen to you, the more things I have to say.
Okay. Well, please pick one topic.
So the first thing is, you wrote an article a while back, and I read it, and it was about the credit on women in the 60s.
Yeah, it's today, too.
My mother was one of those women, and I was her child. My parents were divorced. My mother had 2 jobs and wanted to buy a house, and she was able to make the payments, but she wasn't able to get the loan until my uncle, her brother, co-signed for her.
Exactly.
And when I read, when you wrote that, and I was reading it, I know that it sounds maybe silly with the anti-abortion, because that is horrible, and I am totally against, you know, what they're doing. But it made me cry because it was a sad time for a woman who was divorced and worked 2 jobs and could afford it. They wouldn't do it without my uncle. And if it weren't for my uncle, she never would have owned a home.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my other comment is about charter schools. My daughter's a teacher. She did not teach in Chicago, but she had friends that taught in Chicago. And one of them taught in a charter school in Chicago. And you know what? It didn't meet it didn't meet the standards. It didn't, reach the goals that the state had. Mm-hmm. So you know what they did, Tom? They closed the school. They just closed it. Yeah. And then they reopened it under another name.
Oh, geez.
And none of those teachers, the other thing they love about that is charter schools are not union.
Right.
So they can do whatever
and they're not
want.
regulated the same way either.
No. But even, they weren't meeting their standards. So the same personal, man who owned it, because they're personally owned, they're not educators who own it. They're just people who want to make money.
They're banksters.
And, yeah. And so, they just closed it and reopened it. I mean, how? And then they hold the public school to a high standard. And I think, that they do a pretty good job. Even my daughter, she's in public school, and she has recommended friends who are in private school whose kids have disabilities. The private schools don't meet their needs. And she said, your son needs to get into a public school where they will evaluate him and he will get the extra help he needs.
Right.
So I'm a big proponent of public schools.
Oh,
and Herschel Walker thinks that China is sending their dirty air here,
I know. So, and that we're sending our clean air there. It's automatic, our clean air goes to China and there. Linda, thank you very much. Spot on. Yeah, I'm going to dig into this a little deeper in the third hour of the show. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. What China is doing is buying up a lot of property, then they buy property, and they'll have chicken houses. That's a mess. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So there's a lot of things on my mind that I'd like to talk about, but I would just put this question out there. Given how things are going, how long will it be before women around the world take up arms against the fascist movement?
Well, I don't know about around the world. I mean, there's a massive movement in Poland fighting back against their anti-abortion laws. And I suspect that in November, we're all going to be surprised by this election, although I may be wrong. Women are not any more necessarily politically aware than men are. Many women are in the same situation, particularly women, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. They're out there having to make a living in 50s, having to make a living and whatnot. They're not paying attention to politics.
Could I say something else?
Please.
I'd like to quote Dan Fogelberg in one of his songs called Face the Fire. Mm-hmm. There was a line, I think it's important to say this line. These men are under the power of gold, and we won't be safe until we shut them down cold. And he's talking about the nuclear industry, and I think the nuclear industry holds the whole world hostage.
Yeah, I think to a substantial extent, Bob, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. Georgia in Redondo Beach, California. Hey, Georgia, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm looking for suggestions on how to speak with my Catholic friends, who say to me that they are protecting a life who cannot protect itself. So I personally think a life is when it's a viable life. They do not. And I just really don't know what to say, that they're doing this great act by protecting a human who can't protect themselves. Yeah. So what do you suggest that I do?
What I say to people like that is that I don't think that my religion and my personal beliefs inform me that a fetus is not a person until it's viable outside the womb, until it can live independent of mom, which is typically around the 24th week. After that, you want to restrict abortion, I'm all in favor of it. I think it's a societal obligation, of course. But before that, no. And, if your religion says something different, I respect your religion, but please don't inflict it on me by changing our laws. That's what I would say.
Oh, well, great. I'm glad you said that. I've tried that.
Yeah, it doesn't work, but, it's my truth.
It's just that moment. It's just that, we argue about the moment of when that person's separate from...
Right.
Consider them as separate.
Well, it's the question, when does life begin? And that's there's a biological answer to that, and there's a theological answer to that, and both of them are debatable. I mean, both of those points are debatable. And the other thing I would say is, if you're opposed to abortion, please don't get one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Georgia, thank you very much for the call. It is 48 minutes, coming up on 49 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stick around. We're continuing to take your calls. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So Mother Jones Magazine got a hold of some leaked audio that was taken of Steve Bannon. He was talking with a group of people on October 31st, 2020. That's in the days prior to the election. Now, at this point, everybody in America who was paying serious attention knew that Trump was going to lose this election. The polls were showing this. I mean, he lost by 7 million votes. You can't bury that. You can't hide that. That's a freight train coming down the road at you. He knew he was going to lose. Bannon knew he was going to lose. And Bannon tells this crowd that Trump is going to declare victory on election night because he knows that a lot of the Democrats didn't want to show up in person at the polls because of COVID, and so they mailed in their ballots. Republicans weren't so concerned, and Trump is going to be ahead. And he's predicting exactly what's going to happen, which raises the question, how well planned was this? It really looks like there's a conspiracy. You can check it out. There's a whole video about it at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Oh, welcome back. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, y'all. Yes, sir. As far as getting rid of Senator Manchin, look, I get it as far as good drama in the countdown, but I'm more afraid that we're going to experience another 2010 debacle. I'm more interested. Since we know it takes at least 70% of the population to make anything move, against the top movers and shakers, why can't we unite on how most of us are underpaid? We were promised that capitalism would give us some kind of fair wages based on skill, seniority, something, but now we're all pro wrestlers. We're all in the gig economy. How few of us are making more than $20 an hour with education, with credentials?
Right.
The mark for poverty, I get it. It's important. But that tends to pit the haves versus the have-nots. How about pointing out, dude, we're in a third world country. How can we unite? Instead of letting them pit us, male versus female.
So how do you suggest we do that, David?
That we demand that we identify ourselves not just as the 99%, but as the under 20 an hour gang. Yeah. Because the fantasy, I'm going to be the next Elon Musk, like we were all going to be the next Bill Gates, but we're not. We don't have rich daddies who got their money from elsewhere. That's make-believe. We have to show people the fact, how a lot of us, our fathers or grandfathers should have had the GI Bill, but they didn't. Yeah. That we've all been ripped off.
No, I totally get it. I think Democrats should imitate Newt Gingrich and Rick Scott. Newt Gingrich had his contract on America. Rick Scott has got his 11-point plan for a new America, or for American renewal, I think he calls it. I think that they should come up with an economic Bill of Rights. And the economic Bill of Rights should end student debt, should make health insurance essentially free for everybody, or low cost, like it is in Canada. It costs about $150 a month to get Canadian Medicare, and it covers absolutely everything. Should guarantee union rights right across the board, and just some basic stuff. I think and I'd like to see Democrats organize that into a single document and market the hell out of it. David, I think your point is really well taken. Thank you. Lynn in Palmer, Alaska. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was calling to give people a little more hope and optimism as far as climate change, especially here in Alaska. A few years ago, you may remember, the big banks stopped funding the big exploration projects here.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they did. And at the time, our governor threatened to pull the state money from the banks. Of course, he didn't do that at the time. That would have been the perfect time to do that. Another thing, last year there was a big lease sale up here. There was not one bid. None of the big companies bid on it.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, the state actually put in a few bids, I think, just to kind of save face.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that happened just a few months ago, the two big oil companies quietly paid $10 million to exit some leases they had already bid on. Yeah, so even with that.
Question, Lynn.
A lot of
Well, yeah, finish your point, and then I'll ask my question.
A lot of people may not realize, but there are quite a few towns and villages here that have been using renewables for quite a long time, been doing hydro and other things. We have a big solar farm that recently opened near here, and other solar farms are being planned around the state. So things are really moving in the right direction here, I think.
That is great, considering how long your winter nights are. Or how short your winter days are. I'm surprised you're not tending more toward wind than solar, but that's pretty impressive. So my question, Lynn, are the oil companies pulling out of these contracts because the permafrost is melting and it's becoming harder and harder to get rigs in and drill, or are they pulling out because they're tired of dealing with the blowback from environmentalists and things?
I think it's a combination of all those things, Tom. And also, we reached peak oil a long time ago. At the height, we were pumping 2 million barrels a day. Now we're less than 500,000 a day.
Really?
So they see the handwriting on the wall, yeah.
Wow.
BP pulled out about a year ago. They sold to a smaller company, Hillcore. Hillcore usually comes in to take over legacy fields when they see that, there's not a lot left there. So they're trying to squeeze as much as they can.
They just take out the last few drops.
Exactly.
Lynn, thank you. Go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm sorry.
The newer development that they are talking about some other big projects, but they're also right near projects that they have going on right now. And so it's not really, opening up new places, in Anwar. These are other places that they want to drill in Para.
Just expanding existing fields. Okay. Lynn, thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you for a moment of brightness in our otherwise dim day. Thank you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I want to answer this question about how we protect Americans and their families from the Republicans.
You got a minute.
And look, you just said that Donald Trump is a organized crime figure. He is not. He is a variation on Estatismo and the Führerprinzip. All right. If you bring this stuff up, even some liberals are like, no, don't go with this Führer stuff. This Nazi stuff is counterproductive. One of them, who I really respect, uses this term solutionist. That's what I'm going to call myself from now on. Look, man, there's not much difference between us and Russia. The only difference is their state and corporations have merged. All right, the split between the oligarchy and the worker is unbreachable. In America, it is not quite yet. Okay, it is not quite. Like, for instance, the other day you said if Donald Trump gets in there again, Thom Hartmann will go to jail probably. No, you have a responsibility to not go to jail and to push back against the corporations and de-incentivize them from merging with the Führer of America, which will be Donald Trump.
Okay, Dave, good job. In a minute, I'm impressed. Well, we'll continue on the other side of this break. Could Trump end up president if he's not indicted? And the billionaires buying the midterm elections. I'll tell you about all that right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today we're reading from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a 6-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Donald Trump tells his team, this is fascinating. This is in the Rolling Stone magazine. In fact, the headline, Trump tells team he needs to be president again to save himself from criminal probes. Do you think there's any possibility at this point? I'm really torn. I mean, I remember back in 2016 thinking, you know, Hillary Clinton's a fairly weak Democratic candidate. She's had years and years and years of the Republicans just tearing her down. And a lot of her husband's policies that, you know, were popular back in the 90s when we really believed that, you know, shipping our factories to Asia and Mexico might be a good thing because all these cool white-collar jobs were coming with the internet and the whole information age. And you know, maybe it was okay to give tax cuts to billionaires. Maybe they really would, you know, revive America. You know, a lot of us, I shouldn't say us because I was not in that crowd. I was always opposed to those policies, always. But nonetheless, you know, a lot of people, a lot of good Democrats thought, yeah, let's give it a try. But by, you know, 2020 or 2016, rather, you know, we had figured out that Clinton's policies, his embrace of neoliberalism, he did a lot of good things. You know, Bill Clinton deserves some considerable credit for being a reasonable president. But his specifically neoliberal policies really hurt America and specifically hurt the middle class. And his mass incarceration policies hurt people of color quite badly. And so, you know, fast forward 20 years later, and his wife is running for president, and it's going to be a big lift. But I was thinking in 2016, you know, she couldn't have a better opponent. Donald Trump is the wackadoodle of wackadoodles. There's, you know, he's got to be easy to beat. Well, I don't think anybody expected that Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and the Russian and Vladimir Putin would organize themselves together, essentially, to put Donald Trump in the White House. With the enthusiastic complicity of the American media, you had Les Moonves from CBS News, telling his investors, Donald Trump may be terrible for America, but he sure is making money for CBS. Go for it, Donald, or words to that effect. We didn't think he was actually going to pull it off, but he did. He ended up in the White House. So I'm kind of torn between saying, yeah, Donald Trump, Republican nominee, yes, bring it on, let's do it again, and thinking, oh my God, this could be the end of the Republic. Because there is no doubt in my mind, and I'm guessing there's probably no doubt in your mind, that if Donald Trump became president again, it would be the end of the Republic. He would do a Mussolini, he would do a Hitler, he would do a Pinochet, he would do a Marcos. I mean, that would be it. He would do an Erdogan. He would do an Orban or a Duda, the president of Poland. He would end the Republic. He would turn us into a full-blown authoritarian right-wing oligarchy. Not that we're not three-quarters of the way there already, but he'd finish the job. But that said, his support is slipping. I mean, only about half of Republicans now think that Trump should run. Now, that doesn't tell you how many of them would run, vote for him if he was running, particularly if he was running against a black woman, a.k.a. Kamala Harris. But, I think he may be a lot weaker candidate than, for example, Ron DeSantis. But these things are impossible to know in advance, as we learned in 2016. But nonetheless, Trump is now actively, aggressively, and seriously talking about running for president. Apparently not because he wants to save the world or not because he wants to lead the country and make America, great again or better. And really we need, by the way, that slogan, Make America Great Again, that was Reagan's 1984 campaign slogan, Make America Great Again. Trump just stole that from Reagan. So we really need to call it Make America Great Again Trump. Right? Because this is the Trump version of Make America Great Again. So instead of MAGA, M-A-G-A, it should be M-A-G-A-T, Make America Great Again Trump. MAGAT. So anyhow, Donald Trump is now saying that to his political advisors, in fact, this is one of his quotes, quote, he has said, when you're president of the United States, it's tough for politically motivated prosecutors to get to you. And another advisor said, quote, he says when, not if, he is president again, a new Republican administration will put a stop to the Justice Department investigation that he views as the Biden administration working to hit him with criminal charges or even put him and his people in prison. Well, Steve Bannon's trial started this morning. They did jury selection. In fact, they're probably done with it by now. Jury selection in federal trials is typically a fairly quick process. And this is a federal case. Bannon is looking at 2 years in prison for 2 counts of defying Congress. They're misdemeanors, but you still go to jail for a year. And Bannon's, his fill-in hosts this morning on his show were like, well, he doesn't have much of a defense, so it looks like he's got, it's like, really? So I put this question out. Do you want Donald Trump to run for president again? Do you think that would be a good thing for the Democratic Party? Or better stated, a bad thing for the GOP? I'm increasingly inclined to think that it would be a bad thing for the GOP because Donald Trump really shows the face of how corrupt, how soulless, how misogynistic and racist, how openly, what's the word for being a grifter, the adjective, how openly corrupt the Republican Party is, how in the bag for the billionaires they are. I don't know. I'm torn on this thing, but I don't have any control over it anyway. I don't, there's only a small number of Republicans who listen to this program, and I keep encouraging them to call in. When Republicans call in, you literally go to the front of the line. I don't think there's any other program in America that does that. But, you know, by and large, they just don't want to stick their heads up. They're afraid. I get it. But, you know, if there's any Republicans out there listening, you know, you'll probably have to keep trying to get in because the lines are all occupied right now. But keep trying. Persist. Do you want Donald Trump running? I think it, you know, again, like I said, I thought it was a gift to Democrats in 2016. It turned out I was wrong. And like I said, you know, none of us realized that Facebook and, you know, Zuckerberg and his private dinners with Trump and the Russians and Cambridge Analytica were going to fix the election for him. But will they be able to do it again? I'm skeptical. Okay, that's point one. And point two are the billionaires buying the midterm elections, the 2022 elections. This is a breathtaking story. I will dig into it in a little more detail on the other side of this break. It's 14 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the true people's media.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Yes, the billionaires are buying elections like literally like never before. I'll tell you about that on the other side of this break. And welcome back. Jeremiah in Coalport, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jeremiah, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, 2 points about abortion. Number one, everyone is pro-choice. It's one thing to sanctimoniously pontificate on how a 10-year-old girl should have the child of their rapist. But I'm willing to bet many of those people would change their tune if they were in the situation themselves.
Did you see that? Did you see that viral? I think it was on TikTok. That viral video, the Mormon kid in Utah who called his mom on speakerphone.
It came across. I didn't. Watch the video.
This was nuts. I'll be very, very quick here, Jeremiah. His mother is a pro-life activist. I mean, like in one of the organizations, like one of the leaders of one of these organizations that are working to criminalize abortion in Utah.
Okay.
And he calls her up on speaker, and his friend is videoing it on TikTok. He calls her up on speaker and says, "Mom, I just got Jenny pregnant, his girlfriend. I just got her pregnant. I don't know what to do. What should we do?" And his mom is like, "Get her an abortion quick."
Yeah.
So anyhow, back to you, Jeremiah.
Right, and I cannot fathom these macho, gun-toting, male, MAGA hat-wearing Republicans being okay with raising the child of their wife's or their girlfriend's rapist, especially if the father happened to be black. They would definitely be pro-choice in that circumstance.
Yeah.
But even, this is a segue to my second point, even if, some of those who may have had the child of the rapist and they're still against abortion, I think that they're like the people who are against student loan forgiveness because they paid down their student loans. I had to have the baby that I didn't want. I suffered,
right. And therefore you must too.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a bizarre situation, Jeremiah. It reminds me. I am haunted by a novel. Ed McBain wrote a series of novels called the 47th Precinct novels, and it was about a precinct in New York City, a police precinct. It was made into, or actually it was ripped off, and the rip-off
John Carpenter film?
It was made into a TV series. And I'm sorry I'm blanking on the name of the series, but it was like a major big hit television series that ran for years and years about, a police precinct in New York. And in this one particular novel, I read this back in the 70s or 80s, they were trying to figure out this rapist. These women all around New York kept getting raped and repeatedly raped. The same woman was getting raped multiple times, and then the rapist would suddenly stop. And what they finally figured out was that these were all women who were working in the anti-abortion movement, and the rapist was a demented pro-choice person. And they finally, they caught him and they prosecuted him and everything. But it was spooky. I mean, it was just spooky. Not that I would never recommend or even hope for anything like that. But I think that, when these things happen, like that kid on TikTok, people's minds change very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeremiah, I probably shouldn't have even brought that book up. I don't want to even imply that I'm advocating such a god-awful thing. It just, it has always stuck in my head. Jeremiah, thank you for the call, that novel. Anyhow, we'll be right back. It's coming up on, it's 19 minutes past the hour, coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Jessica Valenti publishes a newsletter called All in Her Head over at Substack.com, and it just has an amazing compilation of bizarre Republican statements about rape and abortion. Michigan Governor Garrett Soldano earlier this year said that there should be no exceptions for rape in the abortion laws because the next fetus might be the next president. Missouri State Representative Barry Hovis said that most sexual assaults are actually consensual rapes. Texas Republican Representative Michael Burgess says that we should ban abortion because if you watch a sonogram, they have movements that are purposeful. If they're a male baby, they have their hand between their legs. They feel pleasure. That's right. Women should be legally banned from getting an abortion so that their male fetuses can masturbate, writes Jessica Valenti. It's absolutely bizarre. Idaho Republican Vito Barberi says you can do a gynecological exam by swallowing a camera. What planet do these people live on? A whole list of them is on a video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So Judd Legum this morning published just an absolutely fascinating piece over at popular.info, his Substack newsletter. It's titled "The Billionaires Buying the Midterm Elections." And he's talking about two primary super PACs. And keep in mind, all this was made possible by the 2010 Citizens United decision by 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court. The two funds are the Senate Leadership Fund, the SLF, and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the CLF. These are Republican groups that can accept unlimited donations, and they have collectively raised $188.3 million through March, through 3 months ago. Last time we've just got the first quarter numbers now. And nearly half of that money came from just 27 billionaires. Let that sink in. 27 men provided about half of the money that Republicans are going to use to re-cement or try to, take back control of the House and Senate. An additional $40 million of the money to the SLF and CLF came directly from corporations. Koch Industries, for example, donated $1.75 million. That's controlled by billionaire Charles Koch, writes Judd Legum. Another $35 million in donations to these two super PACs comes from entities organized as nonprofits that don't have to disclose their donors. $18.7 million comes from the American Action Network, a nonprofit run by essentially those same people. Now, there is a Democratic set of counterparts, the SLF and CLF, the House majority, to the SLF and CLF. It's the House Majority PAC and the Senate Majority PAC. But they've only raised so far about $150 million, and only 17% of that has come from billionaires, rather than about half. By the way, those 44 billionaires who donated in this campaign cycle, they made an additional $168 billion just during the first year of the pandemic because of the Trump tax cuts and the Bush tax cuts and the Reagan tax cuts. But one of the biggest is Ken Griffin. He's the owner of Citadel, this hedge fund. He donated $28 million to these two Republican hedge funds through the end of March. Back in 2012, he was asked, do the ultra-wealthy have an inordinate or inappropriate amount of influence in the political process? Ken Griffin said, I think they actually have an insufficient influence. He added, the government being involved in picking winners and losers invariably leads to a loss of economic freedom and encourages corruption, which is kind of rich given that Ken Griffin owns and runs a hedge fund. It's called Citadel, that back in 2008 was the counterparty to AIG. Remember when AIG went under? It could have taken Citadel with it if the Bush administration had not bailed them out. They gave AIG $182 billion in taxpayer bailout, and part of that was $200 million in cash that went right to Ken Griffin's hedge fund. So his hedge fund, which would have been bankrupt, got bailed out by the government, and now he's saying we've got to elect Republicans because when government bails out organizations, that's corruption. Right. He used to live in Chicago, in Illinois. And he spent, in 2020, there was a ballot initiative that would have cut taxes on people making less than $100,000 and raised taxes on people making more than $500,000. It would have raised the top income tax rate on people making over $1 million from 4.95 to 7.99%. Ken Griffin spent $54 million on advertising in the Chicago market and across the state of Illinois to defeat that legislation. It went down in flames, even though it would have given a tax cut to everybody making under $100,000 a year. He spent $18 a vote. And guess what? He saved $51 million. Keep in mind, he spent $54 million to defeat this thing. He saved $51 million a year in taxes that he would have had to pay had that ballot initiative passed. The only other billionaire who's eclipsing him, according to this report from Judd Legum at Popular.info, is Peter Thiel, who spent $30 million on the campaigns of two of his former employees, J.D. Vance in Ohio and Blake Masters in Arizona. So what we're seeing now, I mean, it was fairly low. These campaign contributions were fairly low prior to, or even in the first couple of years after Citizens United in 2010. But in particular, since about 2018, they have just gone through the roof. Now, this, in my opinion, is not democracy. When billionaires can buy elections, that's called oligarchy, meaning rule by the rich. As Jimmy Carter said on this program many years ago, America is no longer a democracy, it's now an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. I mean, Jimmy Carter just laid it out, told the truth. And frankly, it shocked me that he said it on this program as bluntly as he did. But he did. And it turns out this was not the only place he said it, although very few people were asking him that question. So the question becomes, what do we do about this? Do you have thoughts on this? I mean, obviously we need to raise taxes on these guys, but how can you do that when the Supreme Court says they can spend unlimited money to either destroy the politicians who are trying to raise their taxes or stop ballot initiatives when politicians fail to do it? How do we get around this? I mean, obviously, we need to roll back Citizens United, but, the billionaires are going to stop that, too. How do you unseat an oligarchy? If you have suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Give me a shout.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We will pick up your calls on the other side of the break. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we're still here. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity.
In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls, Laura in Blairstown, Iowa. Hey, Laura, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. First, I wanted to make a quick comment. Excuse me, about Trump. I think that we have to hold him accountable, or else we're leaving the door open for this to happen again.
Right, and otherwise we're not a nation of laws. We're a nation of men,
exactly.
To paraphrase John Adams.
So much. My other comment was about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I'm a 44-year-old woman who's never had children, and I was in talking to my doctor about having children, and he pretty much looked at me like this is a scary time for a 44-year-old woman to have a high-risk pregnancy because things like what's happened to these other women in these stories could easily happen to me because, of my age. So I feel like this kind of shuts the door in the face of a lot of women that might have a high-risk pregnancy.
Yeah, you'd have to move from Iowa to California or Oregon or Washington State first.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm serious.
And I cannot believe that my state voted for Barack Obama, I think once or twice, but then voted for Trump twice. I just don't. My state is messed up.
I think it speaks to the power of right-wing talk radio and Fox News more than anything else. I really think that the Democratic Party is underestimating the impact of media.
Absolutely. And my own mother, has Fox News on at her house all the time. And it makes me sick. Did you know that they had someone on their program who was doubting the 10-year-old story?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Several times, several of their shows were calling it a fraud, and then they didn't talk about it once it became revealed that yes, there actually was a rapist and we know who he is. And then once they figured out that he was an undocumented immigrant, it was like, oh, look at that! And then they were all over it all over again, like it matters who the rapist is, right? I mean, rape is rape.
Exactly.
And especially for a 10-year-old. So what are you going to do, Laura?
I don't know. I really think that it's kind of shut the door in my face on having kids.
That's a tough one.
It's a big risk for me.
Yeah, I can't tell you what to do, obviously, but Louise and I have had 3 kids and 1 miscarriage, and it's such a gratifying thing. I don't know if moving to a state where you feel safe is the solution. California, Oregon, and Washington State have come up with an interstate compact. I don't think it's been signed yet, but the 3 governors did a television ad that has been running out here saying, we are going to fight for your rights to women in these states. We're going to fight for your rights and we are going to protect you. And this is a safe place. So just FYI. Yeah. So, Laura, good luck. It's got to be a tough one. Thank you. Thank you so much for the call. Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, thanks for listening to KTRC. What's up?
Hey, happy Monday. Right before the break, you were talking about how the American voter can get control of their politics and overwhelm the billionaires, basically, would be another way to phrase it. If I was lucky enough to have a talk show and someone called my show, my first question would be, what's your congressional district and who's your representative in Congress? Because we need to motivate people.
It would embarrass most people.
Right. Well, I live in the New Mexico 1st District, and my congressman is Melanie Stansbury. Right. And my state rep is Pamela Herndon. You got to know your state reps, too.
Yep.
Because, see, that's the only way you can overcome the money advantage is by having the average voters engaged and following along with what their congressmen are doing. Everybody always talks about the president. He's not the king. Congress makes the laws.
Yep.
So if the average voter gets control of their congressman by putting a group of 20 people together and say, hey, we need to have a town hall, we need to have a meeting, that would greatly help things, in my opinion. But my original reason I called this morning, I'm a centrist, and I wish you would put centrist on first. You want to put Republicans to the front of the line. Let's start putting centrist to the front of the line, because both parties are the problem.
What does centrist mean?
Well, okay, I grew up in a union household. I worked union my whole life. But that doesn't mean that I agree with every policy put forward by the far left of the Democratic Party.
So what do you disagree with?
What I disagree with is giving everybody everything with no limits and no
specifically, what do you? That's rhetoric. That's BS. What specifically do you disagree with?
Healthcare. Let's go healthcare. Healthcare.
Okay, so you
give everybody free healthcare.
You oppose Medicare for all.
I do too, with limits and responsibilities, which you never talk about. Okay, for example, 40%
wait a minute.
of America
Did you just say
overbeat.
you support Medicare for all?
I would be supporting, yes, for government health care with limits and responsibilities. So you never talk about that. It's always, we're going to give you everything you want.
Well, no, okay. nobody, literally, please, Brian, I will mail you $100 right now if you can name one Democratic politician who ever said, I'm going to give everybody everything they want.
Well, that
is such a Fox News line, Brian. It's such BS. Okay, we've established that you're in favor of Medicare for all with reasonable limits. I am too. You know, in Canada, you have to pay about $150 a month premium, and it covers pretty much everything. I'm not sure in some provinces it doesn't cover dental or vision. In some provinces it does. But, you know, it sounds like you're with me on that. So, again, I ask the question, what, quote, far-left policy is it that you oppose that causes you to call yourself a centrist?
You said that, I remember, I've listened to you a lot because I'm retired now. I remember about 6 months ago you said that studies have shown if we give everybody everything, 3% of the population would do nothing, and you're just fine with that. You'd be okay with that. You said 2, 3, or 4%. So you know what?
I have never said give everybody everything, Brian. What I said, and I will continue to say, is that with any kind of welfare program, there's going to be 2, 3, in some cases as much as 4% fraud. But the price, if that's the price of being able to make sure that everybody has health care, if that's the price of making sure that everybody can go to college at a reasonable cost, if that's the price of having a society where billionaires aren't calling the tune, but instead we are, that's an acceptable price to me. I don't know how to get around that. I mean, you know, I bank with a bank, and I know that bank is subject to fraud. I have a Visa card. I know Visa card is subject to fraud. You're never going to get rid of fraud. So please name one policy of the so-called far left that you oppose that causes you to call yourself a centrist, because it sounds to me like you're a Democrat. A progressive Democrat, in fact.
Okay, free college. You want to change the subject? Let's go free college.
I'm not changing the subject.
Go to college. Okay. I don't think everybody should pay for it.
So why not? Why shouldn't people be able to go to college for free in the United States like they can in every country in Europe?
I think a lot of it would just be wasted, because that's the problem now. A lot of kids get degrees that aren't worth anything. That's the problem. That's the big problem.
I completely disagree, Brian. I don't think there's any such thing as a degree.
They get some degree that they don't make any money in.
And
how many guys I worked with that got a college degree, and then 5 years later they realized they weren't making squat, and then they went back and they tried to get an electrician's union because their uncle was in the union. Then they got a union job and they made more money.
Okay, so how many things that you learned in high school do you no longer use? Shall we just do away with high school? I mean, you know, a lot of stuff that I learned in high school I have never ever used. I don't think I've ever used trig ever in my life. So let's just shut down the high schools too. If that's your criteria, that makes no sense.
Well, the big scandal in education is K through 12. That's where the real damage is done. It's not college. Kids go to college and not ready for it. That's the big problem.
All right, Brian. Yeah, let's shut down our schools. I think we're done. Thank you. You're not a centrist. You are a Republican. Bill in Seattle. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Why are Iran and Venezuela our enemies and Saudi Arabia is our friend? Why aren't we getting oil from Venezuela and Iran? Neither one of them have cut up a living guy.
Yeah. It's a reasonable question, and I think the answer is with regard to Venezuela. The answer is that I believe it was during the Reagan administration we decided we needed a major enemy down there, and Venezuela was moving to the left. And then you ended up with Hugo Chavez.
Venezuela didn't move to the left until Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton? Okay, I stand corrected.
He took over. Hugo Chavez won in '99.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I stand corrected. But, I would say that it was
I mean, there's no reason at all. There's no reason at all except these people, Iran and Venezuela, have fought back of having their money sucked back into New York City.
Yeah, I agree. Number one, I would say...
Saudi Arabia owns New York City.
Let me finish a whole thought here, Bill. With Venezuela, A, it was left-wing politics, and B, it was that their oil can only be refined in 1 or 2 refineries in the entire United States. Their oil is super high in sulfur content.
Not true anymore. Yeah.
And
there's other places in the world they can do it, and we are embargoing their oil and won't allow them. We're trying to kill them.
You're right. I'm not trying to justify this, Bill. I agree with you. We should be, the oil market worldwide should be the oil market worldwide. With regard to Iran, it's a completely different dynamic, and that has to do with Iran funding Hezbollah, which is opposed by Israel or opposes Israel would be the correct way to say it.
Why is Israel our friend? Why is Israel our friend and Iran not?
Well, Israel's a democracy, and Iran is trying to trash talk them.
How come the Israelis are killing their scientists?
I don't know that they are, Bill. In fact, I can't imagine that they're killing their scientists. I'm not a fan of Israel's policies in the West Bank and in Gaza. In fact, I'm opposed to them. Let's not go over the edge here. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Well, the day just got interesting. Sean says, who moved the rock? let the nuts out, I guess. We'll be right back. And welcome back, 46 minutes past the hour. Oh, George in Virginia. George, I just saw that you were on the board. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that earlier. I'll pick you up on the other side of the break because you're listening on Sirius XM. Let's see here. Craig in Golden, New Mexico. Hey, Craig, thanks for listening to us on the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Hey, so basically, billionaires in politics, what the numbers you were quoting earlier in the millions, maybe even hundreds of millions, compared to what these people make in a single year, this is just
chump change.
Penny stock.
Yeah.
It's chump change. These guys are buying us for nothing.
Yep.
And that's what we need to be telling everybody. They're just exploiting us. And just make it plain and clear. People are smart. They understand.
Yeah.
The halfway smart person in the world understands that they're being ripped off.
Yeah, the best investment you can make in America right now, if you're really, really rich, is to buy a politician. And I think the really, really rich people, the morbidly rich people, have figured that out.
And they are hoarders, too. So I'd say stick with that in your messaging.
I'm with you.
I love you, Tom.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Craig, for the call. Good to hear from you. Sean in Maui, Hawaii. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Hey, aloha.
Hey, aloha.
So I was just wanting to comment on your last segment about how we can overturn or take back our democracy from the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. And I really feel there's 2 ways to do this. A realistic solution to the problem is, 1, publicly funding elections, and 2, ending partisan-drawn districts by going to like an independently drawn district.
I completely agree with you, but the question behind the question, or the Uber question, the umbrella question is, how do you even do that when the billionaires will fight you? They will buy politicians to prevent it. And if you try to do it by ballot initiative, they'll carpet bomb the populace, the voting populace, with deceptive advertising.
Yeah. Well,
how do you get around that?
I feel that, I feel like there is a unifying element between the Republicans and the Democrats in this way. I feel like everybody feels like we've lost control of our democracy. So getting back, the hold of that, putting that power back with the people, I feel like is a, cross-party line issue.
I agree, but again, how do you do it? I think this is the debate or the discussion or the issue that Republicans were struggling with 40 years ago. And because they couldn't get people to vote for what they wanted. Just like we can't get people to vote for what we want right now because or elected officials anyway, because they're bought off by the billionaires. And so the decision that the Republicans made 40 years ago was, okay, if you can't do it through the vote, go to the one branch of government that doesn't vote, the judiciary. So let's stack the courts. That was their conclusion. And they started a 40-year campaign with the Federalist Society to stack the courts, and they finally succeeded. I think maybe we should do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I feel like it's getting a simpler message out there is something that the Republicans do amazingly, and something that fits in a tweet. And so this two-part solution, something like getting
See, available wherever you find fine books. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, you were talking about student loan forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got an alternative. See what you think of this. Like millions of men and women like me enlisted in the armed forces for 3 years, and I got my master's under the GI Bill. If you don't want to serve in the armed forces, I don't know whether you could make it apply to something like Vista. You teach in inner city or rural areas. Mm-hmm. Government pays your college loan costs, and you work it off 3 or 4 years. And Tom, the Army taught me two things: marksmanship. I earned a sharpshooter's medal, and Russian language proficiency. And I use that Russian language proficiency to get my job with NSA for over 26 years. So, best move I ever made.
Yeah. I agree with you, George, and I have been calling for this for years. What I have been saying is, and I'm informed by my experience of living in Germany for a year back in the 80s, and I don't know that they still have this program in place, but in Germany in the 80s, when you graduated from high school, at least the men, you had to serve your country for a year, and you could choose to go in the military or you could choose to work in a nonprofit. And I was working with an international relief agency that was based in Germany at the time, and so we had all these kids who were, putting in their year working for us. And then once you completed that year of service, you got free college all the way up to a PhD or MD if you wanted. But you had to put in that year of service.
Where were you in Germany? I was in Augsburg in Bavaria with the U.S. Army.
I was in the Frankenwald, the southern Frankenwald, northern Bavaria, in a little town called Stadtsteinach, near Hof, near Bayreuth.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Kulmbach actually was the big. It was the Kreis Kulmbach. It was the county, and it was the county seat what's the name of the castle? Anyway, yeah, good times. So you were there what years? I was there 86, 87.
72 to 73 in Augsburg.
Okay, yeah, Augsburg.
A quick interesting site, our interception site was in Goblingen outside of Augsburg. And, Augsburg had a big Messerschmitt factory, and Goblingen was a Luftwaffe base, and that's where they tested the Me-262 jet fighter.
Wow. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Well, George, we agree.
I hope you had a good weekend, and I'm recovering from surgery, so I haven't been able to call in as often, but I'm listening every day.
Well, thank you, George, and best wishes on your recovery. I hope you're feeling better soon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the call.
And keep up the good work.
Yeah, you too. Nancy in Norcross, Georgia. Hey, Nancy, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hello.
Hi.
I have a question. Last night, I happened to watch on CNN Steve Bannon, the story of divided we fall.
Yeah, I caught about maybe 15, 20 minutes of it. It was pretty grim.
Oh, man, that's some scary, scary stuff of how he has planned, manipulated, and for me, I watch a lot of different news channels and everything. But I was just wondering, you asked earlier about would I vote for Trump. No, of course not. But, you know, it's like connecting the dots of trying to understand the god-awful stuff that is happening.
Yeah.
And trying to get the word out and awaken people to a person like Steve Bannon, who, oh my goodness, that scared the heck out of me.
Really?
You know?
Wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
What he is doing. You said you watched like 15 minutes of it.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to watch the whole thing because, you know, yes, it's CNN, but, you know, I watch a lot of stuff, but that was very eye-opening about what is happening underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And what Steve Bannon is and how he is trying to manipulate everything, even over in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The part that I saw, they had a bunch of his former colleagues on talking about how brilliant he was and you know, how determined he was and all. And I was thinking, you know, if I was a Republican or a Bannon supporter, this would be an ad for Bannon rather than an expose. I guess I missed the juicy stuff. But at that point, they went to a break, and I changed the. You know, actually, Louise and I went to watch a dumb movie. We've been watching the new version of MacGyver, so we were like, let's have some adventure.
I totally understand. Sometimes I feel so overwhelmed with things that I am understanding and learning, and I have to take a break. So I totally understand.
Yeah, well, that's what we did last night. Nancy, thank you for the call. The next time it plays, I'll go out of my way. I'll make an effort to check it out. You've sensitized me to it. Thank you, Lou in Chicago. Hey, Lou, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Great show. Love what you do. I just wanted to call about Ken Griffin.
Yeah.
I live in Illinois, and I saw all his spots, and I just want to say J.B. Pritzker, who's a billionaire himself, is an awesome governor, and he, you know, it was his proposal. That's why I voted for him, because of the fair tax. Ken Griffin had this massive campaign, and people I know who argued in favor of the fair tax said that it was going to increase taxes on small business, and I had to argue that argument. But I think the point you were making, that it was actually going to cut taxes on regular income people, was not really made. So I think.
So it's a failure of messaging.
I think maybe we should help the Democrats in their messaging. But J.P. Pritzker did a great job by proposing that.
Yeah, I have friends who live in Chicago, and everything I'm hearing is, you know, you've got a great mayor and you've got a great governor. Thomas, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear. Oh, excuse me, Lou, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online,
We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by France Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
To the third hour of our program, the Secretary General of the United Nations is warning the world. And I have a feeling right now, a lot of Europeans are sitting up going, whoa, because you've got, 104-degree temperatures in the United Kingdom today. Literally in the entire 1,000-year-plus written history of the United Kingdom, it has never, ever been 104 degrees. And, now they've got wildfires sweeping across Spain and France and Italy. Europe is on fire. It's starting to look like California. And only 4% of the homes in London have air conditioning. That's how abnormal this weather is. The homes in Europe, and particularly in the UK, are designed to keep you warm and dry rather than cool. And so in the face of this, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, has come out and said, quote, half of humanity is in the danger zone. He was speaking, by the way, at a conference, the Petersburg Climate Dialogue, which is put on by the German government, has been every year for the last 13 years. And he said, quote, half of humanity is in the danger zone from floods, droughts, extreme storms, and wildfires. No nation is immune, yet we continue to feed our fossil fuel addiction. We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It is in our hands, end quote. Now, just to put a punctuation mark on this, Europe is rapidly transitioning to electric vehicles. Really rapid. Like in Norway, starting next year, I believe it is, maybe the year after, it will be illegal to even sell an internal combustion engine. And that kind of law is spreading across Europe. Europeans have figured out, it's cheaper. There are cheap electric vehicles out there. They're available in the United States. The Chevy Bolt, the Nissan Leaf. These are inexpensive cars. They're cheaper than the median price of an internal combustion car in the United States. And what does it cost to fill up an electric car? A 200-mile range electric car filling up at the average price of electricity in the United States costs between $6 and $10, depending on where you live, for 200 miles. That's pretty impressive, right? So the Europeans know this, but here in the United States, there's literally not a political party left in Europe that denies climate change. Even Marine Le Pen's nationalist front Nazi party is acknowledging climate change. And yet here in the United States, I defy you to name one Republican who will say that climate change is real and caused by human activity. There are a few who will say, oh yeah, it's getting warmer. That's because we're getting closer to the sun, or because of sunspots, or because of, I mean, they got these wacky theories, right? The space aliens are doing it to us. But what's really happening is that they're all taking their money from right-wing billionaires who make their money on fossil fuels. And yes, I get it. There's a couple of Democrats in that camp. Joe Manchin in the Senate is still refusing to do anything about climate change. I'm not sure that he's denying it anymore, but hey, when you make $500,000 a year off coal, it's hard to say, we really need to get rid of coal. But today there is an extreme heat warning in the United Kingdom. Tomorrow they're supposed to get some relief, but this has been going on for a couple of days. And this meeting in Germany is apparently a plenary session, a preparation for laying out potential frameworks for the COP27 UN Climate Summit that will be in November, and they're going to hold in Egypt this year. So the Secretary of the General of the United Nations asking a serious question. Do we take collective action and defy the fossil fuel billionaires in the United States and around the world? Or do we all commit suicide as a species? Or species, I guess, singular. I'm in favor of collective action. And the only way we'll get there here in the United States is to vote Republicans out of office. It is that simple. Meanwhile, Betsy DeVos, our erstwhile education secretary, is calling for the end of the department that she used to run, the Department of Education. Now, the Department of Education has a long and storied history. It helped bring us and spread across the United States things like public schools. Department of Education has been doing good stuff, generally speaking. We have had, it has been under assault. Now, I remember, I was in elementary school during the Eisenhower administration, and I remember when Sputnik went up, and my dad would take me out in the backyard, and we'd see this little dot just slowly moving across the sky, and he's like, that's the first satellite. The Russians put it up. It was 1957. I was 6 years old. And Dwight Eisenhower, our Republican president, responded to that by saying, we need to raise a generation of scientists. And he raised a bunch of money for gifted kids all across the United States. And they came to our school, our little elementary school. This was the following year. I was in first or second grade. They came to our little elementary school, and they were doing all these IQ tests and everything else, trying to identify the gifted kids. And me and a kid named Terry in our particular classroom got pulled out and put into this fast-track program. I've told this story before. It's been probably a few years, but I won't go into all the details. It was great though. I mean, I learned so much. By the time I was done with sixth grade, I was doing high school and college level work in math and reading and in other areas. Had a couple of years of foreign language and all kinds of stuff. But then we got Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came along and said, no more money for gifted kids. And let's put a complete ass in charge of the Department of Education to take it down a notch. And he put Bill Bennett in charge of the Department of Education. just to give you a sample, an understanding of who this guy was and how he thought. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy, Betsy DeVos is his intellectual heir, right? She was the head of the Department of Education as well, the one who Donald Trump put in charge of the Department of Education, who just this weekend told a conference, the Moms for Liberty conference, that we need to do away with the Department of Education. Now, the programs for gifted kids that Reagan killed off never came back. But, we still support elementary school education, right? No, Betsy DeVos says, no, we shouldn't. And this, as I said, this all goes back to Reagan. I keep telling you, Louise keeps saying, when Tom dies, I'm going to put it all started with Reagan on his tombstone. But this is Bill Bennett. This is the guy that Ronald Reagan put in charge of the Department of Education.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. That would be an impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible thing to do. But your crime rate would go down.
That's the intellectual genius that Ronald Reagan put in charge of the Department of Education. No kidding. And now we've got Betsy DeVos at this Moms for Liberty summit. By the way, she's not the only one who's saying we need to stop public education. Thomas Massey, the guy who his Christmas card picture, I put it in one of my recent Hartmann Report newsletters. Where he and his wife and his 4 sons were, maybe they weren't all sons, but anyhow, his 4 kids, maybe 5 kids, as I recall, were all holding assault weapons. And it said, Santa, bring ammo, right? He's introduced a bill, actual legislation, to abolish the Department of Education. He says, unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. should not be in charge of our children's intellectual and moral development. The bill's co-signers, by the way, include Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz. Right. Matt Gaetz wants to get rid of public education, but it's such a fertile hunting ground for him. Anyway, 16 minutes past the hour. Oh, he's a big fan of those high school girls. It's 16 minutes past the hour. We will be back with your calls as we continue rolling through this beautiful Monday here. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Thomas in Woodburn, Oregon. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Good. I know it sounds kind of strange, but I wanted to comment that the virus, the timing of it was actually quite fortuitous because it forced all the states to use mail-in voting. And I believe that gave us one of the largest votes that we've ever had in the nation, that and population growth.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and frankly, it's almost like nature was trying to get rid of Donald Trump, because I am convinced that had it not been for the virus, Trump may well have won the election in 2020, but the virus took him down.
Oh yeah. What was I going to say? Darn it!
You were talking about mail-in voting.
Yes. Well, that before.
And it says here that there aren't enough Republican voters. The reason Dems won is that there's not enough Republican voters? Really?
I've never heard anyone say that on national news out loud. And 2020 proved that, I believe. They do not have enough voters to win elections.
No, that's why they're changing election laws in state after state, so that they don't have to do what the people want, and they can prevent people from voting. That's their whole thing.
I understand that. Yeah, it seems like
you've heard me say that.
I haven't. I don't watch you every single day. I watch you a lot, but I've never.
The reason why over 300 laws making it harder to vote have been introduced, and over 100 of them have been passed just in the last 2 years, is because Republicans know that when everybody votes, they lose.
I understand. Yeah. I have a daughter that
simple
just
stuff.
moved from. Go ahead.
No, finish your thought. You have a daughter who just moved?
I have a daughter who lived in Denver for about 15 years. She just moved back to California.
Mm-hmm.
And I have 4 daughters. She's probably the smartest of all of them. And so I enjoy talking with her a lot. And she's been back about 6 months. And I think she's getting, I lived there for 25 years. She's getting Californicated again. And now when we get on the phone, because I talk about politics a lot, she ends up arguing with me. And it's because of what she's hearing. And I said, you're parroting information that comes out of the right.
Mm.
She said, oh, no. I said, well, it's coming out of your mouth, but it's kind of sad that we can't talk much like we used to.
Oh, that's
anyway.
Unfortunate. Yeah. Yeah. People get sucked into this stuff. I mean, they've got some very persuasive lines. And until you know, it's like the guy who called in earlier and said, oh, Democrats just want to give everybody everything that they want. I mean, literally, there's not a single Democrat who has ever said that in the history of the world. But you know, it sounds good. Oh, yeah, you know, these liberals, how can, you know, we can't have this. So, you know, what do we do about it? I don't know. You know, pushing back on right-wing lies and disinformation has become kind of a full-time job, and there's so much of it because, you know, you've got right-wing billionaires who are funding trolls, they're funding, you know, phony news sites, they're funding, you know, radio and television stations, they're funding, you know, advertise. I mean, it just goes on, and of course they're funding politicians. They're buying them left and right. It's the cheapest, the best return on your investment you can make in America right now is buying a politician.
It confirms the desperation of their greed.
I agree. Thomas, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I appreciate it. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back in 60 seconds. Stick around. I have to read an ad here for SVPM, and then I'll be with you on the other side. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. The Economic Policy Institute just came out with a great summary of what's causing inflation and what are the myths about inflation. They go through the 5 major myths, the lies. Number 1, that workers' wage growth is driving inflation. Actually, workers' wage growth is going up more slowly than inflation. It's holding inflation back. Myth number 2, that corporate profits are not the cause of inflation. Actually, more than half of the inflation that we're experiencing right now can be tracked directly to corporations ripping us off. Myth number 3, federal relief and recovery measures overheated the economy and caused inflation. If you look over the last 40 years, you see that that's very much not the case. You might be able to build a case for the Fed feeding it, but probably not. Myth number 4, removing import tariffs would be a major tool to fight inflation. Not so much. And myth number 5, investing in child care and elder care would accelerate it. Nope, not the case. There's a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls, Tony in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Oh, my gosh, Tom. One of the previous callers, the one you actually referenced that says Democrats, we want everything given to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have 2 college degrees. I got them in California. Now, when I got them in California, that's where the money was. I got a job offer in Georgia. So obviously the cost of living was different. I didn't make the same money. So it's not that we purposely go to get degrees that don't pay money. They pay money we're in the city that we're in.
Well, and there's a whole argument for college that has nothing to do with being able to use your degree for your job. Going to college gets you out of the house. It gets you out of your community. Yes. It exposes you to a whole world you didn't know. It exposes you to a diverse range of people. It exposes you to ideas that challenge you. A good college education, a good liberal arts education should include things like philosophy and political science. And
I agree.
I mean, you learn about the world. You learn more about yourself. You're confronted with challenges. You learn how to study. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that yeah, you may end up with an electrical engineering degree and you end up working as a political scientist. So what? The college is still a valuable thing.
And we need to rebrand this. We need to get the phrasing different. It needs to stop being called free education, because everything that these Republicans say is free, it's not. It's taxpayer funded. It's state paid. That's what we need to do. And I personally would have no problem with it, because even as a man of my age, I'm 52. If there was state paid college, I would have no problem going back and getting another degree and opening another business in my community to make more jobs.
Right. Yeah, no, college, I mean, there is no shortage of really good studies showing that free college benefits society. Probably the best study that's ever been done, and I've written about this several times at Hartmann Report, is the study that was done here in the United States after World War II, where in the 70s, or maybe it was the early 80s, they did a retrospective analysis of all those young men who got a free college education. 700,000 of them got a free college education with the GI Bill after World War II. My dad was one of them. Louise's dad was one. He became the Attorney General for the state of Michigan, or the Assistant Attorney General. And
my grandfather was one.
Yeah, so there you go. And what they found was that among those men who got that, and there were a couple of women too, but mostly it was men, and mostly it was white men. And we need to acknowledge the racism back in the day. But speaking of the value of education, what they found was that on average, for every $1 that the federal government invested in putting those people through college, and it wasn't just free, by the way. My dad got a $100 a month stipend to go to college.
Benefit.
He was paid to go to college by the GI Bill, right? That for every $1 that we spent to put those guys through college, we got an additional $7 in tax revenue that we wouldn't have seen, because college-educated people make more money, and because they make more money, they pay more in income taxes.
And also, Tom, there's one program that was under Reagan. Well, I don't know if he started it, but it was called the JTPA. That sort of did the same thing. It let you go to a community college or a trade school, and the state paid for it. You had the option to either, if you were downsized from your job, you could either get the choice to draw unemployment while you went to trade school, or the state would pay you to go to trade school. That's gone as well. Wow. That was a great deal, because when I went in '94, you were offered truck driving school, carpentry, heating and air conditioning, plumbing, and nursing.
Yeah.
You don't even have that anymore.
The other big benefit that came out of the GI Bill was the transistor, Velcro. I mean, we had this explosion of technology that wasn't, everybody says, oh, that all came out of the space program, NASA. That was because John Kennedy said we're going to send a man to a moon. Well, you couldn't have done that if you didn't have an entire generation that went. We went from like 6 or 7% college-educated Americans before World War II to, I think we're at around 16 or 18%, by the 80s. I think we're higher than that now, slightly higher than that now. But it was the result of the GI Bill. The GI Bill paid huge dividends by giving not just free college, we will pay you to go to college.
Yes.
Tony,
but your point, the Republicans don't want intelligent people.
I agree. As Donald Trump famously said, I love the poorly educated. Tony, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I got to tell you, Louise's dad, who became the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan because of the GI Bill, before he went off to World War II, he was dirt poor. I mean, his family was dirt poor.
With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs, or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of bland and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So the Democratic Party has brought us the women's right to vote, Social Security, the minimum wage law, unemployment insurance, the Rural Electrification Act, the FDIC bank account insurance, GI Bill of Rights. These were all things, by the way, majority of Democrats brought us, majority of Republicans opposed. GI Bill of Rights, Security and Exchange Act, Marshall Plan, NATO, the School Lunch Program, the Water Quality Act, the Peace Corps, the First Man on the Moon, Civil Rights Act of '64, Voting Rights Act of '65, Medicare, Medicaid, Guaranteed Pell Student Loan Programs, Operation Head Start, Workman's Comp, Motor Voter Act, Clinton Budget Surplus, Family and Leave Medical Act, and the Affordable Care Act. And the Republicans have brought us, I mean, you know, for average working people, the Republicans have accomplished, as far as I can tell, nothing. Nothing. Well, they had tax cuts for billionaires. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Boy, J.B. Pritzker, somebody called from Illinois just a little bit ago talking about, we got a great governor. He's a billionaire, but he's a great governor. He spoke at a conference for the Florida Democratic Party Saturday. And I just have to, he's talking about Ron DeSantis. And he says, I'm quoting the governor of Illinois now, J.B. Pritzker. He says, this pattern is a clear domestic terrorism threat. He's talking DeSantis, he is happy to pick on LGBTQ kids and immigrants, but God forbid he calls out what the FBI refers to as our most pressing security threat, the rise of white extremism. Ditch cautious rhetoric and even more cautious electoral strategy and start speaking out honestly about the dangers democracy is facing from the MAGA Republican Party. He goes on to say, make no mistake, dealing with crime involves getting guns off the streets. Ultimately, we need a federal assault weapons ban. He's also calling for national attention to, quote, an epidemic of young men enamored with white nationalism, killing people in mass with assault weapons. He goes on, this, again, the governor of Illinois. Here is where the Republican game plan is the most audacious. They want to distract you into believing that gay marriage, black history, Disney World, and library books are more of a threat to your children than AR-15s. Don't tell us that a 10-year-old is too young to learn about the history of slavery, but not too young to run active shooter drills when she learns how to play dead. Boy, he's really taken no prisoners here. He goes on, he says, no part of the Republican agenda is about life. Give me one example of the Republican Party showing up for life in this country. Get ready, because the next thing on their to-do list is a nationwide abortion ban. It's amazing. Good on him. J.B. Pritzker. Proves that not all billionaires are terrible people. Christine in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Christine, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. We were known as the advanced placement kids from, the mid-50s on.
Yep.
The AP classes, there were 16 of us that started in kindergarten. We went through high school together and still are in touch with each other. But anyway, I learned all my Greek and Latin roots in my AP classes in elementary school.
Me too, in 5th and 6th grade. I learned Latin in 5th and 6th grade.
I loved it. But going to when you had your talk with Jimmy Carter, which was such an amazing talk, he referred to us as on the verge of plutocracy, which is government by wealth, by wealthy people, the power of wealth. autocracy is something, more individual. One man has power. At this point, it felt so terrifying to me when he said it, however many years ago that was.
Yeah, it was 7 or 8 years ago,
oh my
at least.
God. But it was plutocracy, if I'm not mistaken. And I was so stunned that he said something like that I just wanted to make sure that I was remembering that correctly.
Well, I'd have to go back. The clip lives on YouTube. You can easily find it. Just go to YouTube and plug in my name and Jimmy Carter's name, and because he's been on the program several times, and there's two different interviews that I did with him where he made similar comments, but they were several years apart. So I'd have to go back and check. But it may well have been plutocracy. My recollection was oligarchy, but the distinction is minor.
Even so, it scared me to bits because it's just, the wealthy and the powerful run the government is what plutocracy means. And I just thought, well, hello.
Yep.
Here we are.
Yep. Yep.
This is. I'm terrified but active. What can I say?
That's what we got to do. I mean, it's not inappropriate to be afraid when you turn around and there's a tiger behind you. It's not inappropriate to be very concerned about what's happening to our country right now. But we also have to keep in mind what FDR said. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, paralyzing fear that stops forward progress. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's damn close to that.
Even so, it is. Can we just start a whole movement just simply called Back to Basics, Legalize Women?
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I like that. Sean is applauding you, Christine.
That's the root cause. To come back to the absolute dirt-based root cause. Let's just simply legalize women.
Yeah.
Please.
Yes.
That would cover all the bases with no muss, no fuss.
Well, that's what the Equal Rights Amendment did, or would have done. It has never passed. It finally was ratified by the 37th state back, a decade or so ago, and a bunch of right-wing legislators took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, it's too late. You can't do it.
Yeah.
You got to start over.
Yeah, exactly. I was struck by the Martin Luther King Jr. quote. I forget who said it the other day. It was Pamela Dryapol. You cannot regulate morality, but you can legislate behavior.
That's correct. There you go.
And I just thought, please, can we come back and just legalize women so that we can behave like the human beings that we are?
Amen. Christine, thank you. You said it so well. I super appreciate the call. Thank you. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, one thing over the years that I've kind of observed about the lie to cheat, lie to steal of Republicans is they basically, there's no lie too small, like crowd size, and no lie too big, like overthrowing the government, that they won't, try and lie to cheat about. And the other observation I have is the Republicans always want a smaller government, less taxes, unless they're the recipient of that. Then it's the sky's the limit, They've created a whole new Space Force, group. They're going to make a lot of money off that in the military.
Yeah. Well, and look at their tax cuts and all their corporate boondoggles. And,
But the one solution I had for the political side of things, and this is only part of it, is they should just write a law. I'm going to write to Mark Kelly and Greg Stanton, my representatives, about this, is saying that you guys can't become lobbyists until 10 years after you're out of office.
I agree. Five years is the number that has been proposed in Congress several times, but 10, I'd be happy with 10. Close the revolving door. Yeah, close the revolving door.
That would be part of it.
It is a big deal. Rob, thank you. That's spot on. Candace in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Candace, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I was thinking a little bit of your snark was showing today.
Yeah, sorry.
What I wanted to talk about. No, it was great. I don't know how you keep your cool all the time. I'm thinking about that lady from Georgia who called, feeling what is going on, and I think a lot of people can't figure out. There's so much information coming from so many places, so they'll land on an island of, say, a Bannon or an L. Ron Hubbard who is certain of everything.
Right.
Because they have no certainty and they have no ability to figure it all out.
Yeah, certainty sells.
Yes, and
it's part of Trump's charm,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so charming. But
you know what I mean.
Subconsciously, yes. I think a lot of us, like animals, feel this earth shifting beneath our feet. We're out of time for cooperation because man has never cooperated. Henry VIII's time, most people didn't know anything, and it's a lot like that now. There's people that are just so low information, they really can't comprehend what's going on, and at the same time, the ground is shifting under their feet with climate change.
Yeah.
We all feel a doom coming and a net coming with the psychopaths and the Republicans that are trying to control everything, and we're out of time. So either we get it together this time, or I don't know.
Well, that's what the UN Secretary General said. You know, António Guterres is like, you know, are we going to have collective action or are we going to have collective suicide? And you know, and it's not just climate. I think it's democracy as well. Democracy is on the line around the world.
Absolutely. Critical moment. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you, Candace. I appreciate the call. It is 44 minutes past the hour. Here on the place where smart people get their news. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Boy, sharks off the coast of New England. This is new, isn't it? I think. Must be warming currents. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Tom in Seal Beach, California. Hey, Tom, thanks for listening to the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. 50 years ago, I was lucky enough to get a nearly free world-class college education here in California.
Oh, before Reagan killed it off.
That's right. I was there when he did it. In the last 50 years, the single course that's been the most use to me was a survey of 19th century philosophers. And today I couldn't tell you which philosophers it was that I was reading, and I couldn't tell you what they were saying. But what I remember was the first reading assignment I had as I'm reading the guy's thoughts, I was convinced, well, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And then the next day I read the criticism. I thought, how could I fall for that?
Exactly.
And the second philosopher, the same thing happened to me. By the third philosopher, I could recognize, well, you know, there's some weaknesses in his argument. And by the fourth and fifth, I got pretty good at spotting fallacies in the argument.
You discovered your critical thinking skills.
I did. I may not know the answers, but I can recognize things that are fallacies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they should teach philosophy in high school, frankly.
I think it would be worthwhile. We need more critical thinkers.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And after I got my degree, I did like your earlier caller. I ended up becoming a union firefighter. Took a pay cut to do it, but
good on you, Tom. That's genuine public service.
Oh, it was a great experience.
Great career. Okay. Tom, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience with us and validating my argument for college. Thank you so much. Holly in Marshall, Missouri. Hey, Holly, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I was just wanting to respond to the man who called about crime statistics and abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the people who marched in the second wave feminism for Roe v. Wade. And 18 years later, criminologists discovered that crime had dropped. All crime had dropped.
Yep.
And we started to talk about why. And it made sense because the babies that were born could be cared for, wanted, and loved. And they wouldn't be put into foster care or be raised in poverty.
Yeah, it is so easily demonstrated that unwanted children, not always, not even frequently, but more often than not, when you look at criminals and you look at people in prison, you find that they were unwanted children as children.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Very, very well said, Holly. Thank you. And this is, I mean, in fact, I think when this really became a widespread understanding in America was back in the 90s when this Freakonomics book was published. I believe it was the 90s, might have been the early 2000s. And these two authors did a really, really thorough analysis of this. And they found that, hey, 16, 18 years after Roe v. Wade, after the right to an abortion was established, and the number of unwanted children or unwanted pregnancies was reduced, the overall crime rate was reduced as well. And as those children aged, the crime rate associated with those ages changed too. So, buckle up. The next 18 years are going to be wild. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. 49 minutes past the hour. Mike in Savannah, Georgia. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Hey, thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Hey, you make it real hard on the half hour I'm waiting to get with you to choose a topic, but I'm going to, anyway, student loans.
Okay, go for
it. 2009, took out $70,000. It's paid back $73,000 in the last 12, 13 years. Owe $75,000. Right now, it's 6.5% government subsidized student loan.
That's
okay.
insane.
Now, the point is, and I'm proud to be able to, make payments, but I'm getting tired of people going 0 to 100. There's no in between. It's either, oh, you should pay this back, or it should be free. Well, how about just a reasonable 1%, 1.5%, 2% interest rate? I mean, I'm paid less. I'm paid 3% on my home, for crying out loud, let alone 7% on a student loan.
You know how billionaires avoid paying income taxes?
Exactly.
Instead of taking a paycheck, which is subject to income tax, they borrow money at like 1 or 1.5%, because really, really rich people can borrow basically at the federal fund rate. And then in some cases they even own the banks that they're borrowing it from. But they borrow at 1 or 2%, let's say at the most, now that the rates have gone up. And then they live off that borrowed money. And when it comes time to pay that money back, they'll sell a little stock or something like that and pay a small capital gains on it. Or just roll the loan over and just keep rolling the loans over throughout their whole entire lives, because they've got enough assets to continually have that debt. And that 1 or 2 or 3% that they're paying in interest is a hell of a lot lower than the 25 or 30% they would have to pay in income taxes. And now, if billionaires can get away with this stuff, why can't people with student loans do that?
Well, I just get tired of the Republicans always saying, "Well, why should you go for?" I'm not asking for free money. I've paid it back already. I have paid the entire loan back. Okay,
right. And you still owe the entire loan. In fact, you owe more than you originally borrowed. I'm with you, Mike. It is a scam. It is a grift. It's obscene that when corporations can borrow at 1 and 2%, that students are being forced to borrow at 6 and 7%, and now it's going to be going up even beyond that. It is wrong. It should not be happening in the richest country in the world, when every other developed democracy in the world, and every single one of them is smaller and poorer than the United States, offers free or very, very reasonably priced college education. We are the only country in the world that has widespread student debt. The only country in the developed world. Mike, thank you. Perfect. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind today?
Positivity, Tom. The choice of hope over fear. We have to present ourselves, I think, as Democrats, not just with the list that we know all the things that Democrats have done versus Republicans, but health care in the viewpoint of corporations and communities. So for corporations, when everyone has health care, you give benefits to people that belong to fitness clubs because they're healthier. for the community. Everyone pays less for common things like healthy food and lower drug prices. It benefits everyone. Education, when everyone is well educated, you were just talking about this, corporations have a better pool of employees, and communities have greater participation in education. So if we present these things that we have done for people, like say we want safer communities, safety is a universal desire. Corporations will spend less on safety training. Schools and communities will feel, where's the downside?
Yeah, Lori, I'm sorry, your phone is fading out, but I get your point, and I agree with it in every regard. In fact, when we did this program from Copenhagen, Denmark, back about 7-8 years ago for a week, the Danish broadcasting service, Danish Radio, loaned us a studio. And I had on, I don't know if he was the mayor of Copenhagen or some high official, and they had just turned a whole bunch of streets into bikes only. And he was talking about how they funded that out of their health care revenue. And now I'm not sure if it was a one-to-one funding or anything like that, but I was like, how do you do that? And he's like, well, if people are riding their bicycles, we're going to have fewer heart attacks. If we have fewer heart attacks, our health care costs less because we all pay for our health care through our taxes. So putting in the bike lanes actually saves us money. It's incredible. Evan in Chicago. Hey, Evan, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, it's Kevin. Yes.
Kevin. Okay, let me fix this. What's up?
I've been called worse. I've had this bugging me since January 6th. With everything that's come to light with the January 6th hearings that we've been all witnessing, all of the guns, the weapons, and such that they confiscated or saw. My question is, when Trump was giving his speech on January 6th, he was in back of a full plate glass of bulletproof glass, from what I can see.
That's correct.
I have never seen any other president, behind such a defense.
Well, he knew that it was an armed mob coming. That's why Mo Brooks was wearing a bulletproof vest.
Exactly, but why has that not been brought up by anybody?
Well, maybe it will be tomorrow, not tomorrow, in the next hearings, because they're going to be focusing on what Trump did during that period of time. But I think it's just kind of common knowledge, but I'm with you. To me, that's evidence of premeditation. Kevin, thank you. Pamela in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Pamela, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, I've been noticing lately that the news media and are making the same mistake as they did in 2016 by giving Trump free advertising. Whenever he posts something on his troubled social media platform, they mention it by name. I even saw one make it a link. They should just say he posted without saying the name. I don't even want to say the name. Don't give people a roadmap to that site.
It's his newest grift. He's harvesting names.
For sure.
You've got to give them your phone number when you sign up. They love that.
Oh my gosh.
It's nuts. Pamela, thank you. Spot on. I agree. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires every single one of us, and that includes you. If you want to have a decent country, you've got to participate. And I think we would all like to have a decent country, wouldn't we? Let's get these Republicans out of office. They are ripping this place apart. Anyhow, so get out there, get active, tag you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.